If you'd like to, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. I post every Wednesday.
Hey everyone, my name is Catherine and welcome to my channel. I wanted to do a review on my most recent EF trip that I went on, or should I say trips that I went on, because I know when it comes to booking these trips, they're not cheap, you know? They are definitely commitment, whether it's financially or with your time, and I just wanted to give an overview on the EF trips I did and what I thought of them, and that hopefully they could be helpful to you. My most recent EF trips I did were in the summer of 2022. I went in July and I did 2 EF trips back to back. The first trip I did was to Costa Rica and the second one I did was to Ecuador and the Galapagos. And one great thing about doing back-to-back trips in the same general region in the world with EF Ultimate Break is that they know that sometimes people like to book 2 trips back to back. So generally they align well date-wise. Sometimes there may be a few days in between, like 2 or 3, but typically they like to have the option to have people book more trips because they want people to book trips. Why did I choose Costa Rica and why did I choose Ecuador and the Galapagos? I wanted to hit South America because I had never been there before. I had not explored that part of the world and really did want to. And for me, first off with Costa Rica, since that's technically in Central America, I'd had some experience in Central America briefly on a cruise, but not too much. I love wildlife, I love animals, I love sustainability, and Costa Rica is pretty well known for being a sustainable country, for being a country that has very happy locals, for being a country that has incredible biodiversity and wildlife, and for that reason I wanted to go. It's also just known to be a more popular tourist destination compared to some of its neighboring countries, and just to be a bit more safer as well. So that is why I wanted to go to Costa Rica, and it did not disappoint. As for the Galapagos and Ecuador, the Galapagos is part of Ecuador, but it's just so different. Ecuador is like in the mainland, and then the Galapagos are these incredible islands that have, you know, wildlife and biodiversity that's not found anywhere else in the world. And that is exactly why I wanted to go to this EF trip as well, and go to the Galapagos as well as Ecuador, not only to just say I've hit South America, but to explore a place I had not been to and to see more wildlife and biodiversity that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. So there are several ways to be able to book with EF. You can just book with flights and everything included. You can book with your own flights. When it comes to booking tours back to back with EF Ultimate Break, it is generally a pretty simple process. It just might sound a little confusing at first, but it's really not that bad. What you do is you buy one of your tours, typically the first one that you're going on, just to make things easier. You buy it with flights, and then you buy your second tour without flights. On your first tour, or the tour you booked your flights with, you let your contact know. There's always a contact that you reach out to and that is given to you, and you let them know, hey, I'm going on another EF trip right after this. I will be flying out of blank country. So in this case, it would have been Quito, Ecuador. So instead of flying into San Jose, Costa Rica, and go back to Seattle from San Jose, I told them, hey, I'm flying to San Jose, Costa Rica, like everyone else on this tour, but my departing flight from San Jose to Seattle, can you change that to be Quito, Ecuador to Seattle, Washington, and move the dates as well? So that way you have from your home city to the starting destination of your first tour, and then the ending destination from your second tour back to your home city. And now the only thing that you have to do yourself is to book your flight from the first country to the second country. So I just had to book my flights from San Jose, Costa Rica, because that was where the tour started and ended. So where it ended, I booked my flight from San Jose, Costa Rica to Quito, Ecuador, because that's where it also started for my second tour. And because those countries are generally close to each other, or way closer to each other than the US is, the flight was not that bad with like price wise or time wise, and was pretty simple to book. Just make sure that you're flying in the same day or earlier as everyone else. And sometimes you might have to wait a couple of days in between countries because they might not align perfectly, which is totally fine to do solo for 2-3 days. I decided to extend my time in Costa Rica. When it comes to COVID precautions, because I went in mid-2022, things by 2022 have lightened up a lot, but even more more so now since then, but back in 2022, the only things is that you have to be vaccinated and then you need to show a proof of a negative COVID test within the last 72 hours. So what I did is I took a test before flying out of Seattle to Costa Rica, and I brought that test with me. I brought the piece of paper saying it was negative and just the whole thing. I brought with me 2 COVID tests. One I knew I was going to take no matter what for that 72 hours before starting my Ecuador trip, and another one just to be safe. That was the only thing. And when it comes to actually showing EF or like going back to the US with like the airport and customs and everything, no one ever asked for my COVID tests. I could have not done them and been fine, but I'm glad for peace of mind that I was good to go. With the hotels that we stayed at, I would say when you're in more uncommon destinations, that's basically just not Europe. So for me, here in Costa Rica and in Ecuador and the Galapagos, we never stayed in hostels, and in Costa Rica there were only 2-person rooms that we were staying in, and generally they were pretty nice hotels. They were, I would say, like around 3-star hotels, and where we started out, the first hotel / also the last hotel, because we stayed in the same hotel when we started in San Jose, Costa Rica and ended in San Jose, Costa Rica. It was a pretty nice hotel in Costa Rica. Typically when you're in a big city, you will be staying right in the center of the city, and it's very convenient with the location. And now that I think about it, I feel like the hotel is actually more like a 4-star. It was a pretty nice hotel, and breakfasts are always included, and then typically your welcome and farewell dinners are included along with another dinner or 2 and some lunches. Most dinners and lunches will be out-of-pocket expenses. Other hotels that we went to that were more in like smaller cities or more nature places, they were all still pretty nice hotels. A lot of them had pools, for example, and it was just really great. I really did like all the accommodations. There weren't really any complaints on my end. And same thing for Ecuador. We stayed in a pretty nice central hotel in Quito, Ecuador. For Costa Rica, the tour group itself wasn't too big. I think there were around 20 something people, like lower end, like 22-ish people that went on that trip with me, which some of the other trips like in Europe or I'm booked on a Japan trip, those ones are a lot more. My Japan trip has 41 people. The Costa Rica ones are definitely a bit smaller. They're popular, but just not as popular. And then my Ecuador and Galapagos one, we had like 14 people. It was pretty small. And we even downsized from the typical buses that you will see, because that is your main mode of transportation between cities. We downsized to like a large minivan versus a bus, and it worked out for us. And I actually really did like the small group size. It really got us to know everyone pretty well, and it made things a little bit easier with the Galapagos, because we did have to fly from mainland Quito, Ecuador to the Galapagos and then take a boat from each island, and that would have been a lot more difficult with like 40 people versus 14. I did hear from some people that they wanted to do other tours, or they wanted to do this tour, specifically Ecuador and the Galapagos, and due to low enrollment it got canceled and they have to choose a different destination or a different date. So that's also one thing to note, is it's just not as popular of a tour. Most people on both of these tours, especially the Ecuador one, they were at least in their mid-20s. There were a few younger people, especially in Costa Rica. There was like a girl that just turned 18. There was some other people that were like early 20s, but I think I was more or less in the majority. And both trips had people that were in their 30s. At the time I was 28, and I was not the oldest on either trip. I was probably like the 3rd or 4th oldest on each trip. So some things that I packed that was useful for both trips, they were both pretty similar, but for Costa Rica, I will start with that one. I would pack a lot of swimsuits. A lot of activities include just being in water, and I ended up buying these like water shorts from Amazon, and they were so good. I wore them all the time on my Costa Rica trip, and they were very comfortable to hike in. They were, because it's a very active trip, and there's even some hikes that we did, like we went to La Fortuna waterfall, and that was a hike where you started at the top, you hiked 500 steps down to the bottom, and there you can swim near the waterfall, not right by it because the water pressure from the waterfall is too dangerous, but we were a little bit further away and we got to swim, and then we had to hike all the way back up. Definitely those water shorts were very useful. I just put them over my swimsuit, and they're also just fast drying as well. Another thing is a lot of people had water shoes. I bought some for the trip, but I bought basically the wrong ones. I bought like the closed-toed full-on like water shoes that look a bit ridiculous because I did the water rafting and it said to wear closed-toed water shoes, and then when I got there that was not needed. Like, you couldn't go barefoot, but a lot of people were wearing those waterproof sandals. They're called like chacos or something off the top. I'll have to look it up and I'll post it here. I really wish I had those types of shoes versus like the weird like looking closed-toed bright blue shoes I had. Another thing I would recommend is a good just day hiking backpack, and to bring a hydro flask or Stanley cup or whatever that's like travel friendly to be able to refill, because there were a lot of spots along the way in the hotels where they had drinkable water. Do not drink from the tap water there, but it was drinkable water where you can refill, and it was really great. For the Galapagos and Ecuador, I would say pretty much the same thing. There weren't as many water activities because most, I would say like 60% of the trip, if not 70%, was in actual mainland Ecuador, and that was more outdoorsy but not water activities. And then the Galapagos itself was definitely water activities. Still definitely bring swim stuff and all of that. It just wasn't as swim heavy, I would say, as Costa Rica. On all the different EF pages for the different tours, they will have the activity level listed, like low, moderate, or high. Everyone on my Costa Rica trip agrees that Costa Rica should not be labeled as moderate. It should be labeled as a high activity tour. It's very tiring. It's so worth it, but it just requires a lot of stamina. You're doing a lot of hiking, you're doing a lot of walking. It's not like intense hikes, but it's just like you're constantly doing things, and it's always outside in nature, and it's just not as chill or relaxing as maybe some other tours are. Another thing to bring is a waterproof phone case. I've noticed a lot of people had this. I didn't, but it's like a cord that kind of goes around your neck like a necklace, and then it's a little basically like plastic pouch, and a lot of people had that, and they used it for when we went like kayaking, or we went whitewater rafting, or just swimming in general. Just make sure that when you're on these water activities that the cord is strong and that you have a good grip, or like it's on you and just it will not like come off you. I would not bring your phone on like whitewater rafting at all, honestly. But why I say this is because when we went kayaking, it's a much more chill water activity, but someone did end up dropping their phone. It was in a waterproof case. The partner that he had, because it's like a 2-person kayak, got back on the kayak and accidentally flipped it, because you can go swimming at the pit stop there is. And when it flipped and he was on the kayak, he let go of his phone, and the phone quickly sank. And waterproof or not, it's not a flotation device, which maybe that'd be cool. Is another thing to look into, is like a waterproof flotation device kind of a case. But he lost his phone, and so just to be careful when it comes to water activities and decide, is it worth bringing your phone with you? Now, I'll just end this off on a few last notes, and I know it's kind of all over the place, but there's just so much to cover in these things. I didn't want to go into detail about every single thing we did every single day, because this trip was like 2-3 weeks, and that would be a very long video. For the food in Costa Rica and also in Ecuador, I'm a big foodie, and I had not known very well about like what food to expect, but I'm pretty open with food. I'm not that hard to please. But their like corn tortilla soups and their avocado soups were so good, and I just think about it and I miss it. It was so good. I really recommend to get those soups. You will go, if you go with EF, you will go to different restaurants that will offer them. There's this one place that we went to in Ecuador, in Baños, Ecuador, which is like a high adrenaline kind of a place. I went ziplining and all these crazy activities, and it was just so beautiful in the mountains. It was incredible. And we went to a restaurant there. That restaurant was my favorite restaurant out of all the restaurants I went to on the entire trip. I'm a big soup gal too, and it's like a thicker consistency, and it was just, it warmed the soul. Even though it wasn't cold there, but it was just still so nice. And another thing is passion fruit. It's one of my favorite flavors. I love boba. Passion fruit boba is a thing, and I love it. I went to the part of the world where passion fruits are native plants and fruit around, and I could just get it all the time. And it was so funny. There's this joke on my Ecuador trip that I was the passion fruit girl. I was obsessed with passion fruits, and it was just so funny. Every time we went to a restaurant or we had to stop for a snack or whatever, and there's a passion fruit flavored ice cream or drink or whatever it may be, people would be like, we know what Catherine's getting. And it was just so funny, and just thinking back at it like makes me happy. And we actually, in the Galapagos, one of the first things we got to do, which was so exciting, is we got to see the massive famous tortoises that you see in the Galapagos that live for like well over 100 years old, like 200 years. And it was awesome. And we got to like walk around and take photos with these giant tortoises. We couldn't touch them, but we got to hang out with them. And there were so many of them in this sanctuary. There were passion fruit trees all over the place. And my tour director knew about my love for passion fruits. And he just like picked one up and opened it up and was like, here you go. And I was just like walking around, eating my fresh off the tree passion fruit and looking at tortoises, and I was like, what is my life? This is incredible. We also, like in Costa Rica, we went on a pineapple farm. That was one of the first things we did, and we got to eat fresh pineapples. The guy had this like machete. It was intense, and he like, pineapples grow from the ground, and he just like macheted it off. And he did this really cool trick where he just really quickly like cut off the outer edge of the pineapple and then held it with like the trunk or the leaves upside down. It was like a pineapple popsicle, and he cut us fresh pieces of pineapple. And it was, I'm not the biggest pineapple fan, but it was the best pineapple I had ever had in my entire life. It was so good. I will have to say the best thing about these tours is definitely the people. You make such great, incredible connections with the people, whether it's your tour guide or the people on your trips. And this was no exception. It always takes me a couple of days to like get used to people, just because I'm an introvert and everything's new and it's a bit overwhelming, and I'm generally an anxious person. And I remember on my Costa Rica trip, I got close to a couple of people, with everyone generally, but you know, you're gonna get close to like a couple people versus all 20 something people. And I remember thinking like, I just so badly want to do Ecuador with these people. I don't want to have to like make friends all over again, because it is, you know, it can be a lot. And I just really wanted to continue on my trip with these people I just befriended, but I couldn't do that because it was a whole new trip. But I did befriend the people on my Ecuador trip, and I loved them all in different ways. It's just so incredible to meet all these travel like-minded people. My upcoming trip to South Korea has 7 people. That is tiny. I think typically tours won't run if there's only 7 people, but I think this is still running because it is an ambassador trip, which I'd never done before, and I'm excited to do so. But also it's the very first South Korea trip that EF is offering, and they want to do it like a test run essentially, and it's always easier to do like a test run when there's less people, so it kind of works in EF's favor. So that'll be exciting to see how that'll work, because that's like half the people that were on my Ecuador trip, which is wild. But that is the general gist of my experience with my Ecuador and Costa Rica trips. So I hope that this is helpful to you, and that if you have any other questions, just let me know down below. I hope you have a great day or night whenever you're seeing this, and I hope to see you in a future video of mine. Bye!